This case was so shocking, I couldn't leave any detail out. This is a case of what it appears to outsiders is not what it seems. Jennifer Rosenbaum had a mask of protection, and not many saw through it. She had everybody fooled that she had life figured out, and despite her unfortunate upbringing, she was a responsible and respectable member of society. On paper, Jennifer Rosenbaum had it all. She is not what she appears. This case is about the death of Laila Daniel and the abuse of her sister, Millie Place. Jennifer was their foster parent, along with her spineless husband, Joseph. Okie dokie, let's talk about Laila and Millie. Laila was born July 18th, 2013, and because Millie is a minor, I'll keep that information out and confidential, and I won't show any pictures of her either. They were born in Atlanta, Georgia, to their bio mom, Tessa. Tessa grew up in the foster care system. Tessa's mother was also a drug addict and would often be homeless. This landed Tessa into foster care. Living an unstable life, Tessa soon picked up her mom's old habits and started using drugs herself at the age of 16. Tessa became addicted to meth, which sent her down a path of destruction. She was in and out of jail, along with a wild lifestyle, brought her to the point that she couldn't care for herself, let alone her two children. This would lead to eventually Laila and Millie being placed into foster care and the home of Jennifer. 27-year-old Jennifer Holcomb Rosenbaum grew up in an unstable and unhealthy home filled with domestic violence and physical abuse. Her family was often homeless. At the age of 9, Division of Family and Child Services, which we'll call throughout DFACS, reported extreme anger and rage issues from and about Jennifer. Jennifer was dealt a bad hand in life. She didn't know how to deal with her circumstances. Therefore, she acted out in the only way she knew how, to release the buildup of anger she had. Fighting and arguing was the norm for Jennifer. But against all odds, Jennifer Rosenbaum miraculously turned things around from foster care with a drive to succeed. She found a way to better her life and help others is what her goal was in the process, so it appeared. She graduated high school and became part of Army National Guard military as a police officer. With serving the military, she would be able to fund her ultimate goal of going to college, and she was accepted and attended the prestigious Emory University School of Law in Atlanta, Georgia. She was taking classes in hopes to become a lawyer one day. She was a very civic-minded person who sought out how to make a difference in her community. This would give her a following on public access television for her appearances at the Henry County Commissioner's office. She wasn't really popular with the county officials because she demanded accountability and fiscal responsibility for the council members. She was described as a thorn in their side. Jennifer could not deny she loved the limelight and attention. This gave Jennifer access to other influential community organizers. She joined the Young Republicans group and was seeking out mentors within these groups. She worked as a legislative aide at Mike Dugan's office. Mike Dugan's would go on to give her a glowing reference to land her an internship with the Henry County Probate Court with Judge Kelly Smith Powell. This position was very competitive and was a huge opportunity for Jennifer. Judge Powell introduced Jennifer to Mary Evans Battle. That's her name. It sounds like an organization, Mary Battle, but Mary Evans Battle, who was a senior assistant district attorney in the juvenile division for the Henry County's DA office, who also happened to be on the board of DFACS. Because of these influential recommendations, Jennifer was able to bypass the normal hiring process of internship working for the district attorney's office directly under Mary. Mary encouraged Jennifer to run for District 1 Henry County commissioner seat. Deep breath when you say that. Jennifer supported many of Mary's political aspirations and ideologies, and vice versa. Jennifer got herself into a bit of a pickle when she was criticizing the county on social media. The mask slipped down a little bit too far. This brought attention from the district attorney, Jim Wright, who scolded Jennifer, stating it is against his office's policy for employees or interns to disparage or embarrass the counties publicly, including any media forum. Jennifer received a formal written warning about her public remarks and to stop or she would lose her position. Although Mary agreed with Jennifer that she should be able to speak freely about how she feels, free speech, Mary in the end counseled Jennifer to follow the rules and to not jeopardize her political career and her internship. Jennifer was married to Joseph, who they had met in 2009. Joseph had some health issues and could not have children of his own, thank God. Joseph was born with cystic fibrosis, a genetic and fatal respiratory disease that can be passed on to natural children. Most male sufferers are usually infertile. Cystic fibrosis sufferers have a life expectancy of less than half than the average healthy person. Jennifer fully took on his medical issues as she joined support groups, and it was something she shared often with anybody who would listen. Look at me, I'm a survivor, and my marriage is the evidence. Jennifer and Joseph both wanted to raise a family together, so they would apply to become foster parents on 2 different occasions, but DFACS denied them 2 times. All times. They were never approved. They were denied the first time Jennifer applied. She applied under her maiden name the first time on her application, but her application uncovered her past history, which resulted in an automatic denial because Jennifer was a past foster child with a history of physical abuse by her parents. The policy was because most children who were abused become abusers themselves. The second time she applied with Joseph using her married name and purposely did disclose her previous history within the foster care system. She's thinking if I leave it out, they will approve her, as if they weren't going to do a background check on her. She was required to attend an orientation as well as parenting classes on top of undergoing extensive background checks. Jennifer wasn't hearing none of those things. She wanted to be approved without the appropriate background check and the requirements based on the fact that she was a law student and a self-proclaimed superior candidate. She believed that they would be lucky to have someone of her social standing as a foster parent. On a phone call, she was so enraged by the application process, she hung up on the supervisor after telling her, quote, "You don't know who you're dealing with." I think they did know who they were dealing with, and that's why they immediately denied her application. I wish this was the end of her foster care journey, but there is one thing Jennifer had, and that was determination. Part of Jennifer's internship with the DA's office required her to observe Mary Evans' battle in the juvenile courtroom where she prosecuted juvenile offenders. This is the same courtroom also used for custodial foster care hearings for DFACS. So although the juvenile offenders are there and Mary is doing her thing, the DFACS foster care children cases would also come there. So there was a little bit of overlap that Jennifer saw. In April of 2015, Jennifer recognized who was in attendance that day. This was the same person's mom who she had once been in foster care with as a kid. She remembered that her daughter, Tessa, who was a couple years younger than her at the time, that Jennifer and her were in the same home together. Juvenile cases were supposed to be confidential, but rules do not apply to Jennifer. Jennifer came across the file with the names of the children, Laila Daniel and Millie Place. Jennifer saw an opportunity and decided that she wanted to foster Tessa's children. Jennifer learned that Tessa was struggling and she wasn't the same success story as Jennifer had become. She had become addicted to meth and had repeated incarcerations for drug-related violations. Oh yeah, and she is also pregnant at the time the hearing and was headed to jail pretty soon for another charge. Although Tessa was a mess, she cared about her children and wanted them to be placed in a good home. Although she knew she couldn't take care of them, she didn't want to give up her rights. And Tessa was part of the process to find them a home. She was desperate, and Jennifer knew this. Jennifer felt no empathy for Tessa, and it would become known later. Jennifer thought Tessa would get what she deserved by being apart from her children. With the help of Jennifer's supervisor at the DA's office, she was able to be put in contact with the social services caseworker, Samantha White, and asked to be put in contact with Tessa. She expressed empathy for Tessa and was offering to become a fictive care home for Tessa's children. She knew that the requirement was not that of becoming an approved foster parent. You did not have to jump through all the hoops to become a fictive home provider. Jennifer would be treated by the court as a close family member and would be able to bypass the formalities of becoming a licensed foster care parent, a loophole she was hoping to take advantage of. Jennifer found Tessa on Facebook and sent her a message. She acknowledged that she knew Tessa was going through a hard time and she would like to help, and with her permission, she would like to foster both Laila and Millie. Tessa did not have anyone in her life that could take the girls. She was out of options. So when Jennifer reached out to Tessa, Tessa was grateful for the help. Only Tessa's grandmother, Peggy Banks, could offer any stability at all for the girls, but she was aging and was in poor health. She was recovering from a hip replacement, but with that said, she also only wanted custody of Tessa's oldest child, Millie. She did not want to take Laila. I can only imagine it would not be easy for her in her condition to take care of a 2-year-old. The two of them together was most likely more than what she was able to handle. Throughout Millie and Laila's short life, they were left with strangers, acquaintances, and even given to friends of friends. Once Tessa gave Millie to a relative of a woman who was taking care of Laila for almost a year, as Tessa was living a drug-frenzied lifestyle, never able to provide a stable or consistent home for either of the children. Likewise, the children's respective fathers. The fathers were also struggling with substance abuse and addiction, as well as prison sentences. The temporary caregivers truly loved the children, it is believed, but due to one thing or another, they were not able to keep the girls long term. This is the part where a lot of names are going to be thrown at you. I'll make it as clear as possible, but there is a lot of people in and out of both Millie and Laila's life. Tessa once worked with a woman by the name of Cynthia Tang. Cynthia had a daughter named Tiffany Shaw, who was a young stay-at-home mom with a 1-year-old boy. Cynthia and Tiffany provided a home for Laila for almost a year, raising Laila and her son together as siblings. Millie had been living with her great-grandmother, Peggy Banks, but unfortunately, she lived in a community that required all occupants to be 55 years or older, and that's when Millie went to go stay in the same house as Laila, and that was Tiffany's home. Then it became too much work for Tiffany to care for both children. They were considered a safe resource home, so Tiffany wasn't getting any money to care for the children, and it just became too much work and financial burden. So Cynthia, the girl that Tessa used to work with, asked her ex-husband and her ex-husband's new wife, Michelle and Scott Chapman, if they could take Millie, and they arranged for them to come meet Millie. They spent 30 minutes with Millie and then took her home. So one day she is at Grandma's house, then she is at Tiffany's house, and then some days later she meets someone for 30 minutes and then they take her home. As an adult, that sounds extremely scary and confusing, not knowing where you're going to be sleeping from one day to the next. The Chapmans, with Tessa's permission, had full intentions of adopting Millie. Because they were not in the state's care, the Chapmans were considered another safety resource for victim placement of Millie. The Chapmans were instructed not to allow Tessa or her family to take Millie with them for any reason. This angered the girl's great-grandmother that she couldn't see Millie, so when Millie's dad was briefly out of jail, together they went to visit with Millie. However, they ended ended up taking Millie from the Chapmans without the Chapmans' permission. This was it for the Chapmans. They were like, this is way too much drama. Millie then went back to Tiffany's house, where Laila had been living. But Tiffany felt the same way as the Chapmans. They did not want to deal with the family, and they didn't want to deal with defects, and asked that both children be removed from their care. DFACS wanted the girls to stay together, so they at one point were placed in a foster care home. Now let me introduce the Brown family. From what is reported, the Brown family were a good family. They actually found Tessa on Facebook to let her know that her girls were safe and they were with her. Brown offered to come and pick Tessa up and take them to church with them. For whatever reason, the girls were pulled from the Brown's house and placed with the paternal relative of Millie's, who agreed to take both children together. However, just 2 days later, they changed their mind. What? 2 days? They changed their mind? This is when the court date was set and the girls first crossed paths with Jennifer. And this brings us to when Tessa was contacted on Facebook by Jennifer. Tessa said she didn't even try to think of bad stuff about Jennifer, and they had previously got along, which she had forgotten that really they didn't get along in the past, and it never occurred to her that Jennifer would want to harm the children. After all, she reached out to her, offering her a hand to help her with the girls. From what she could see on social media, Jennifer had a stable home. She was running for public office and was almost an attorney working at the district attorney's office. So when Tessa hung up with her caseworker, who was letting her know that Jennifer was interested in the girls, Tessa actually went to go contact Jennifer, but Tessa already had a message awaiting for her from Jennifer in her Facebook messages. Tessa responds full of hope that this is the picture-perfect family she had been waiting for to take the girls. Her stress is over of who's going to take care of the girls bouncing around. Jennifer was the answer. After Tessa exchanges messages with her caseworker, Samantha, requesting to allow the Rosenbaums to become a priority fictive care foster home for Millie and Laila. Tessa referred to Jennifer at this time as a blessing. She was so grateful. I have to imagine this blessing would soon become her biggest regret. Jennifer and her husband were allowed visitations while they completed the background check and the home safety inspection. It was later discovered someone who was unauthorized to sign off on these required checks, but did so even though neither of the requirements had been performed. While Jennifer was awaiting official approval, the children were placed together in a seasoned foster care home with Patricia Lambert. Include another person, these poor girls. Lambert took her responsibilities very serious and had a folder for each child in her home and meticulously documented their care. This woman was on top of it. She also insisted that the caseworkers comply with policies requiring them to physically inspect each child at the mandatory monthly visits. It was apparent that not all caseworkers followed the rules, and it was unacceptable to her. Lambert was not messing around. You go, girl. Lambert described Millie as a very stoic and adult-like child. She would further say Millie was wise beyond her years. She preferred engaging in adult conversation as if she were an equal instead of that of a child. Laila was nonverbal, so Millie would often speak for Laila and would act as a caregiver more than she would a sister. With the consistent change in guardians, Laila had food issues. She wanted to constantly eat. She also was hoarding her food. Just under 2 years old and had so much anxiety about whether or not she was able to get enough food to eat, that she overeats or hoards food. It literally breaks my heart. The girls were both evaluated at the Lamberts' home for counseling by social services. However, ultimately no counseling was recommended. Millie and Laila were never physically abused or suffered any trauma that they could meaningfully discuss due to their ages, and usually recommended therapy when they were 5 years old or older, and they were verbally able to participate. So they didn't need counseling at that point in their life, they decided, but it was likely that as they aged, they probably would need some counseling. I would say 100% they would need some counseling, but at that time, they denied it. Due to Jennifer's political connections, she was immediately given overnight visitation with the children. Right away, there was signs that the Rosenbaums might not be qualified caregivers. After their visitations began, the children would return with burns, bruises, and abrasions that Mrs. Lambert became concerned, so much so that Mrs. Lambert became concerned that Jennifer was too new to care for young children and perhaps wasn't providing them enough supervision. Mrs. Lambert originally was calling the social services office, but she wasn't getting anyone there to answer her. So Mrs. Lambert, being hardcore, physically went to the office to voice her concerns. I really like this woman. I cannot say it enough. She packed up those children and took them to the DFACS office 2 separate times so they could document and photograph the injuries to both of the children. Her thoughts were, if they were truly accidental injuries, that it was just a matter of the Rosenbaums were learning and recommended that they provide more diligent supervision for the young, active toddlers. The caseworker took her concern to the supervisor, in which they were to open an investigation as to why and how the children were obtaining injuries while with the Rosenbaums, but that never happened. Yes, you heard me correct, folks. It never happened. Burns, abrasions, scrapes, nothing happened. Unfortunately, this would happen so many times along the way that their placement with DFACS, it was amazing how much these children were failed. And I have to say, for the record, I know that I give social services a hard time, but I have to tell you, if we don't raise awareness to the issues within social services, then there will never be any improvement. There are good caseworkers and there are bad caseworkers. Such as life. There are good people and there are bad people. And I want to say that the majority of people are good. So these are the exceptions that I talk about, but these are the huge exceptions that people need to learn from, especially our social service workers, our DFACS workers, our CPS workers. You cannot not do your job. I don't know how else to say it. Anyways, my rant is over. But in any case, it was as if Jennifer walked on water and the rules did not apply to her. The rules were put in place because of people like Jennifer. It is so frustrating. It would become evident in hindsight that the caseworker Samantha White's supervisor was applying pressure from the DA's office to transfer full-time care of Millie and Laila to the Rosenbaum's home. To explain the injuries to the children, Jennifer had been telling her supervisor, her boss, her mentor, Mary Battle, that the children were getting injured during visitations with their biological family, which was a complete lie. What Mary didn't know is that Mrs. Lambert meticulously inspected the children after each and every one of the mandated visits, and therefore never saw any injuries to the girls when they returned from visiting their family, Tessa and Peggy Banks. No injuries. There were only injuries after visits with Jennifer and Joseph. Mrs. Lambert's concerns for the children while they were in the care of Jennifer were being ignored, and in the meantime, DFACS was getting pressure to place the children to the Rosenbaums. Mary Evans Battle, that's her name, from the DA's office, who is also on the DFACS board, contacted DFACS on behalf of Jennifer Rosenbaum, asking them what was taking so long. The caseworker explained that they have not completed any or all of the requirements, and they have 30 days to complete all of the tasks required. So that should give you a time frame of how much pressure they were applying, because it hadn't even been 30 days yet. Home visits, background check, 911 call log data, they needed time to complete all these tasks. But a judge instructed DFACS to bypass the requirements and place the children with the Rosenbaums. A judge overruled everybody. Place those children with the Rosenbaums. Don't complete any of the checks. In my opinion, They should both lose their jobs. Both Mary and the judge is abuse of power. Granted, they were only getting one side of the story, which was Jennifer's, which completely painted a picture full of lies. I get it. But those checks are in place for a reason. The children were not in danger at Mrs. Lambert's house. They had time. July 24th, 2015, despite all of Miss Lambert's concerns, Laila and Millie were placed in the care of the Rosenbaums. Without any direction or consent, Jennifer sent an email to Tessa and Peggy Banks stating the visitation would cease immediately with them, and she blamed it on the caseworker wanting the children to settle into their new home and establish a bond with their new family. This was a complete lie. And after the month, she said 30 days in her email, and they complied. After the 30 days, Peggy, the great-grandmother, wanted to resume her weekly visits with Millie. She would usually take her for the entire day, from morning until night, and on occasion, she would recruit a second person to help her, so then she could also take Laila. Jennifer did not like this at all. She wanted all the control of the children. Jennifer wanted her strict regimen to be followed even when they were in their great-grandmother's care. So when Millie didn't stick to her regimen of Jennifer's nap schedule, she made a new rule to only pick the girls up after their nap at 1 p.m., cutting her visitation in half. Jennifer wanted to cut off all communication with the family. She had to appear somewhat cooperative, though, at this time, because Jennifer wanted Tessa's yet unborn child. Tessa was pregnant, and Jennifer wanted that baby as well. Therefore, Jennifer started making excuses as to why the children couldn't visit with their great-grandmother, Peggy, each week. Sometimes it was because the children weren't feeling well, or she would say that they had counseling or gymnastics. Most of the time, it would only be Millie who was available. Most likely, it is believed because Laila had too many unexplained bruises. She couldn't hide or excuse away. Jennifer had over 2,000 pictures on her phone of the children. Most of them were of Millie. Because Tessa wasn't able to visit, she would ask Jennifer for pictures of the children, in which they communicated regularly on Facebook Messenger. Jennifer would tell Tessa that she should just get healthy so she could regain custody, even though Jennifer had no intention of giving the girls back to Tessa. Jennifer would send old pictures of Laila acting like they were new. Tessa became suspicious of Jennifer, but didn't say anything. Laila had to go to the hospital for apparently contracting the flu and needed to get an IV. Jennifer describes Laila as unfazed and, quote, a trooper. Continuing on, that only Millie was available for visits as Laila was often unwell. Pressed for more photos, Jennifer sent a picture of Laila with a black eye and claimed it was from daycare. She also told Tessa that Laila was the aggressor and was a bully, telling yet another lie, and that the other child was the true victim and looked worse than Laila. Jennifer's lies were endless. Laila wasn't enrolled in daycare. She also was not enrolled in counseling or gymnastics. That didn't stop Jennifer from using those events as excuses to why Laila was never available for visits. DFAC's caseworker Samantha White would do these monthly checks on the children, and she had to document as monthly policy to complete her job that she was physically inspecting any nonverbal children from head to toe without any clothing. She was also required to speak with the older children like Millie in separate rooms to verify they were safe and being treated well. She did not complete these tasks. The next month, in August of 2015, Laila had 2 black eyes that were observed by Jennifer's neighbor. Jennifer once again told her neighbor that she was a foster kid, and the biological mom was awful to Laila. She was again painting the picture of her being this great person that saved Laila from grave danger. She told the neighbor that Laila fell down the stairs and had gotten black eyes and an injury to her nose. Her neighbor, Michelle Hall, was a registered nurse. The bruises looked older and suspicious. Also, she was concerned because Laila seems to be listless and at times catatonic. She didn't believe Jennifer was telling the truth and told her that the child needs to be seen immediately at the Children's Hospital in Atlanta. Michelle watched Jennifer's house for 2 hours, and she never once took Laila in for proper medical care. So Michelle went back over to Jennifer's house and confronted her, insisting her that she needed to call the non-emergency line for guidance, and the hospital said that it could wait. It seemed that it wasn't an emergency and that she could go see her regular doctor the next day. So Jennifer promised the neighbor that she would take Laila to the doctor the following day. Michelle, the neighbor, was also a mandatory reporter as a nurse, but she didn't call protective services. Michelle Hall was so concerned about the children because of something Jennifer had said to her daughter Jordan prior to the children being placed in their care. Jennifer would say, "The mother is a meth addict and Karma is a bitch. Now she would be taking care of a meth addict's children." Jordan, the daughter of Michelle Hall, the mandatory reporter who didn't report it, Jordan would say from that point on that she would not want to interact with Jennifer. Jennifer had previously asked the caseworker Samantha White about sending both girls to gymnastics. DFACS denied the request, but rules do not apply to Jennifer. Are you kidding me? Don't they know who they're dealing with? Later, Jennifer enrolled Millie under the name Millie Rosenbaum to these gymnastic classes. No rules for me. It was reported that Laila would sit quietly on the bench in a catatonic-like state at Millie's practices, never speaking or making eye contact with anyone. She didn't have the energy of a normal toddler, most likely because she was in various stages of healing. One of the other mothers asked Jennifer why Laila wasn't taking classes along with Millie. Jennifer told her that the toddler was a foster child and was a drug baby. Jennifer tried to get sympathy and would down-talk the biological family, making up stories that painted them as monsters. She would go on to say that the mother was addicted to meth and had burned the child and made her eat feces. As if Jennifer's like, "Look at me, I saved her from all these horrible things. They are so lucky to have me, don't you agree?" No. The other mother at the gymnastics was told that Millie was Jennifer's natural biological child and Laila was fostered. She casually made up lies with ease about saying she spent $25,000 on IVF treatments, but in another breath, she's mentioning that her husband had cystic fibrosis and probably wouldn't live long enough to see Millie grow up into adulthood. Feel sorry for me and praise me for my selflessness. It was glaring to most people around Jennifer that she had affection for Millie, but seemed to be developing a seething rage and disdain for Laila. The caseworker again noticed that Laila had a mark on her face at a home visit, and Jennifer told her the same story she had told Tessa 2 months before, that the mark was a result of an altercation between Laila and a boy at daycare. Again telling her the story that Laila had attacked a boy and that he was injured far worse than she was, as Laila was the angry bully. Jennifer was beginning to slip and was having trouble keeping up with her lies. She was having a hard time keeping them straight, who she was telling what to. Anyone who watches the children for any reason needs to be reported to DFACS, including daycare providers. So the caseworker asks for the information of the daycare. Jennifer gave the name of a daycare where Laila had allegedly sustained the injury. Yet, when Samantha, the caseworker, followed up, she discovered that Laila wasn't enrolled. Samantha contacts Jennifer, and Jennifer told her that they changed churches and provided her the name of a different daycare facility, saying the whole thing was a mistake. Wright contacted the second daycare. She discovered once again that Laila has never been enrolled at that facility. Samantha contacts her again for the third time, and Jennifer told her that the enrollment had not been final, that Laila has never been enrolled at the facility because she couldn't complete the paperwork because Samantha failed to provide her with proper paperwork such as her birth certificate. So it's your fault that she's not enrolled into the daycare. The daycare had no such requirement for a birth certificate to enroll children, so that was a lie in itself. Samantha never followed up on how the injuries were actually sustained. That's where it all started, the whole daycare thing. It's almost as if Samantha got off track of proving what daycare she's at versus investigating why the child was hurt. So what does Samantha do? She just closed the investigation. Was Samantha Wright just overwhelmed in her duties, or was she intimidated by Jennifer's high political ranking and affiliations? Jennifer would frequently drop the name of prominent community leaders such as Judge Powell and Assistant District Attorney Mary Battle. She would also regularly discuss ongoing political campaigns for a seat on the county commissioner's office. However, it should be noted that after an investigation of Samantha White's cases, it was only Jennifer's case that she was dropping the ball. She would repeatedly fail to do her job when it came to Jennifer Rosenbaum and Laila and Millie. Jennifer was a bully to protect her facade, is what I believe. The next month's visit in October from Samantha White, Laila had a broken leg. The caseworker was told she got this from gymnastics and that Laila had sustained the broken leg after falling off of a balance beam. She also told Tessa the same story about Laila's injury. She was never enrolled in gymnastics, only Millie was. DFAC's policy is to open an investigation. Samantha White stated that she filled out the report, but the supervisor never found a said report, and the supervisor denies ever being notified at all of the broken leg. Samantha White allegedly attended one of Millie's gymnastics lessons in which she quietly watched from the back. She didn't talk to anybody to confirm the injury of Laila, and confirmed if even Laila was ever enrolled. If she actually went to gymnastics, she sure didn't document it or talk to anybody about Laila. She would have found out that the pack of lies that Jennifer was giving her, and she possibly could have saved Laila's life. If anyone had properly investigated the injury, they would have discovered that Laila's broken leg was not consistent with the fall into Peggy Banks's backyard, another story that Jennifer told, or from a fall during gymnastics as the beam was only 4 foot off the ground. Jennifer sent Tessa a photo of Laila with a smile that will break your heart. You can tell Jennifer told her to smile. It did not look genuine at all. She had a complete leg cast. She told the pediatrician that Laila was forced to visit with her biological parents and they didn't watch her, and she had fallen in a hole in the backyard of her great-grandmother's house. The pediatrician did not report this even though he was supposed to. He referred her to get a cast. He didn't put a cast on it, so he referred her to go to the children's hospital for a forensics examination so they could complete it. But Jennifer waited 3 days before taking her to another doctor who was not a forensic investigator because, of course, she's in fear of getting that done because it would be her demise. The new doctor didn't ask any questions. He just put a cast on and moved on with his day. Are you sleeping well, doctor? What was later determined is Laila had what is called a nightstick break, which is a defensive injury sustained when you put up an arm to fend off, or arm or leg to fend off incoming blows. The next month, Laila would receive another nightstick injury, resulting in a broken arm. The broken bone was untreated as Jennifer knew she couldn't get away with explaining away a second broken bone. Laila's untreated arm began to heal and took on an odd and deformed shape. If Samantha White would have followed up with the medical provider of Laila's broken leg, she would have likely discovered that Jennifer had once again lied in where and how Laila had become injured. Reoccurring injuries and changing stories, it begs to question, how did the caseworker Samantha White not discover any of Laila's bruises, burns, or other injuries during any of her monthly progress reports? Those children were in the care of Jennifer for 4 months. Jennifer, again, for her regularly monthly visit, a few days later, on November 2nd, 2015, she never actually talked to Laila or checked for injuries. despite the fact that Laila had a broken leg. Jennifer told Samantha that Laila was sleeping and had been teething. She doesn't remember checking Millie for injuries either, but after reviewing records, she recalled a small bruise to Millie's eye. She was told she slipped in the bathtub and there was no fear of her drowning, so Jennifer didn't believe that the injury was an issue and didn't report it to her, Samantha White, or her supervisor. Samantha White consistently downplayed the girls' injuries. She was in self-defense mode, and in my opinion, it's disgusting. No one is perfect. Own your mistakes and take the consequences. She would write off black eyes as marks. There is a big difference. This brings us to November 2nd, just 15 days before a big event that we'll talk about. The children would be covered in bruises. They would both have untreated and undiagnosed broken arms in various stages of healing. Laila also suffered from a healing fractured rib. Laila wasn't sleeping that day due to teething. She was most likely sleeping because she had a healing fractured rib, or probably was most likely sleeping because she had a non-fatal lacerated liver that was slowly bleeding into her stomach cavity, causing her to be more and more lethargic as it continued to slowly heal. Also, equally sad that Samantha didn't perform a full body inspection of 4-year-old Millie, as her buttocks was black and blue. As well, her inner thighs and pubic area were bruised, where Jennifer liked to kick the girls as punishment for when they moved too slowly. These injuries would have all been noticeable just 15 days prior. Of the most significant was the head-to-toe bruising of Laila's entire body that would come to light on November 17th. Here's the call that was the start of a complete exposure of Jennifer's pure evilness.
What's going on there?
788 Radio Code 1. I have a toddler, a foster daughter that I just got. She was choking, and I tried to do the Heimlich on her, and she's still breathing, but it doesn't look good.
How old is she?
2.
She's 2 years old?
Yes, sir.
She is breathing now?
She is breathing. I'm trying to do CPR. She keeps on going right on you.
All right.
I'm hoping I didn't break her rib. I've been pushing hard. I don't really know how to do this.
Okay, I'm going to give you instructions on how to do it. Is she still choking on it now?
No.
Okay, so it is out, so we just need to do CPR then?
Yes.
Okay.
She's breathing, but it's not good. Please hurry.
Okay, none of this is slowing them down. Another dispatcher's getting them on the way. I'm going to give you instructions for you on what to do. Are you with her right now?
I am. She's
Okay.
breathing, but very, very low.
Okay, lay the baby flat on her back, on the ground.
Flat on her back.
All right, move any
She's on the
pillows.
ground. And there's no pillows.
All right.
Flat.
Look in the mouth for any food or vomit. Is there anything in her mouth?
No, not from what I can see.
Okay, place your hand on the baby's forehead, your other hand under the baby's neck and shoulders, then slightly tilt the head back. I want you to put your ear next to her mouth and tell me if you can feel or hear any breathing.
I hear it.
You do hear it?
Yes.
Okay, all right, stay with her. Make sure her head is slightly tilted back, and I want you to keep checking breathing often. I want you to, starting now, every time she takes a breath in, tell me when. Just say now every time she breathes.
When? Now? 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 Does it matter that she's asleep?
No, that's
Now.
fine. That's fine.
Oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. I don't know how to do this. I just kept trying to push and everything.
You're fine. You're doing a good job. Like I said, I got help on the way to you.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, we're just monitoring breathing right now. She is breathing.
She just did it. She breathed again. She's breathing on that same little schedule.
Okay. Yeah, she's doing fine. Like I said, we got them on the way.
She just breathed again.
Okay, yeah, she's doing fine. What, do you know what she was choking on?
Chicken.
Okay. Said she is asleep.
Yes, like her eyes are rolled back.
She is breathing, yeah. We make sure. She keeps telling me.
Yes, she just breathed again.
Okay.
She breathed again. Like, this is so scary. Are her eyes supposed to be, like, rolled back?
Her eyes are rolled
Oh,
back?
my God. Yeah, like, I told you, like, her eyes are rolled back. Her eyes are closed, but they're rolled back. She's really pale.
She is really pale now? Okay.
Yeah, she's still breathing on that same schedule, but she's pale.
This is the end of part 1. Hit your notifications for part 2, which will be out in the next couple of days. I've talked a lot about Jennifer, but remember, she was married. We will talk about the medical examiner's report as well. We will also hear from Millie herself as she testifies in court against Jennifer.